Okay. There is.
Good evening, everybody. Oop. Mic on. There we go. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the ZDRB meeting on Tuesday, November 12th, 2024. Tonight's meeting is a little different than our normal meeting, but we will start with the normal protocol, beginning with a call to order and a roll call.
All right, Member DePasky?
Here.
Member Henthorn?
Here.
Member Cook?
Here.
Vice Chair Zagorczyk?
Here.
Chair Miller?
Here. Would you all join me and stand and face the flag for a Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Does anyone want to make a motion to adopt the agenda?
I make a motion to adopt the agenda.
Thank you, Thomas.
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. The agenda is adopted. Approval of minutes. We have regular meeting minutes from October 8th.
I went through the minutes and didn't see anything of concern. I'll make a motion to adopt the minutes.
Thank you.
I'll second that.
Excellent. All in favor?
Aye.
The October 8th minutes are approved. Public comments on matters not listed on the agenda. Is there anyone here that's here for anything other than the study session? Doesn't look like it. Okay. Let's move on to what we're all here for.
All right, I will introduce. I'm Brad Ralston, the town manager, and I first wanted to just, for those that don't know, explain what study sessions are intended to do. The council, when they last year adopted the town council member handbook, we established the idea of a study session, which is a type of meeting that is less formal and more open to public interaction. So in essence, here tonight, even though I know you're up on the dais, we're sort of all at the same level, so that members of the community that are here in the public can have conversations without coming to the mic for 3 to 5 minutes and making theirs. So I am going to turn it over to Brendan Kelly and his partner, Carrie Morgan, are here to be the lead presenters. For those of you that have not met Aaron Heacock, this is our new planning and building director. I've asked that Aaron do the Phil Donahue tonight. For those of you that have been here, to the others, he will try to read the room and be available, with those 2 live mics to come out to you if you don't want to come up to the mic, but you're welcome to do either. And, I'll try to nudge Brendan if anyone wants to talk, but I also think, make yourself heard. Sometimes it's hard to know who's wanting to talk, so raise your hand or don't raise your voice, but, make yourself visible in terms of wanting to chime in. So, that's all I'm going to say. I'll turn it over to Brendan Kelly. I can answer any questions, yeah.
Brad, in the documents that were provided to us prior to this meeting, it indicated that, and I think it was either poorly worded or erroneous, that the town's general plan had not been updated in 25 years. It just didn't mention that it had been done a couple years ago and ratified. The wording was strange. I was just going to find it, but I just wanted on the record, we have a general plan that is dated 2020.
Yeah, I think it was finally adopted in 22.
22.
It was a process that took a couple years. Yeah, and it was recent. So I'd be interested in where you saw that. I haven't seen that, but
I'll find it and I'll tell you in just a second. But just wanted to bring that up.
Thank you. All right, do you want to bring the deck up? And
good evening or good afternoon.
Hit the button.
Hit the button.
There you go.
Good evening and good afternoon, or which one, whatever. It's dark outside, right?
It is.
Good evening. My name is Brendan Kelly. I'm here with my partner, Carrie Morgan. This is the last of the study sessions, but it's really the first of the presentation of a lot of concepts. And it's not by accident that this is happening. Of course, we waited for this group, which we think of as experts in terms of Yountville, specifically around design and building issues, and you guys have a lot of opinions. Tonight is not like a typical zoning and design review board meeting, in that we're not looking for your approvals. But it's a lot like your typical zoning and design review meetings because we want your opinions. We want a lot of opinions. And I want to do a lot of listening for, and you don't all have to agree. There's a lot of things to respond to. I'm going to go very quickly for the first part of this presentation, mostly to summarize for everybody all of the things that we've done in the prior study sessions and some of the other open houses. And this Thursday starts a process where this model has more of a starring role than the deck presentations that we've had to kind of rely on. I do want to have a note for those attending, and I think I know all of you because I've met a lot of you on the private appointments. The deck will be kind of simulcast of the model. You're not going to sort of miss anything, but if you want to come up and stand and sort of watch some of these model things go on, please move up or sort of stand back here so that you can also see it. You shouldn't have to sort of feel like you're not sort of being a part of it or seeing anything. Is that okay, Brad?
Yeah.
It's very informal. If you have a question, please stop me and ask the question. This is not a lecture. It's not a sales job. We're looking for input, and there's a lot of different ideas that we're going to go through. All right. Are you ready?
Yes.
Great. This is where we are. You can see us smack in the middle of this timeline. ZDRB, November 12th at 5:30. We have met with the town council a couple of times. We've met with Measure S, with Parks and Rec. We've had a couple of good open houses, and of course, a lot of meetings. That map underneath the screen up there has the 100 or so that we've seen, and that number is about to grow substantially as these open houses get populated. The next one is on Thursday night, Thursday afternoon at 4 o'clock. There's a sign coming about sort of joining the conversation. It's mostly an encouragement. There's been a lot of really great outreach by the town electronically and on the website. This is old school sign right in front of the school showing where the office is and that QR code to to get to some of the invites. So you're aware there's a lot of people who live in Yountville. Half of the houses are not lived in full-time by full-time residents. And the bigger issue is that because a lot of those houses are being used as second homes or renting for sort of short-term visitors, there's not a lot of workforce housing here. The best time to have addressed this was about 25 years ago. The second best time is right now, which is what we're doing. There's about 3,000 jobs in the town of Yountville. There's about 1,200 people that come here every day outside of the town to work. It's actually more than the full-time residents who are here. And the biggest target here isn't just housing, but a housing that makes sense for workforce housing. Brad, do you have any other sort of pieces here? They're coming from all over. Half of them come from Napa, and the other half come from a lot of other places outside of the county. They're driving alone, mostly. And one of the reasons that it's not just Yountville's problem is that the mismatch between 1.6 person households who are living in 3.5 bedroom houses is not just happening in Yountville, it's happening from American Canyon all the way to Calistoga, and really it's a California issue. Most people now are living alone, and most are living alone in very large houses. So when you're a young family or a young person or a retired person and you're trying to downsize, there's actually not a lot of places to downsize. So it is not just a Yountville problem. Yountville has an amazing opportunity with this project. Here's the mismatch. You can see how many single family homes are here. Yountville actually does a pretty good job from a census standpoint because the Veterans Home is really a group home, and there are a lot of good duplex projects. Hopper Creek is a multifamily project, but there's not a lot of them really anywhere in the valley. And of course, it started with the school district proposal, 48 townhomes or 42 single-family homes. We'll get that into a second. And Yountville Commons, the former school site, we've kind of named it the Commons because of the ability to reinforce that this is in the center and it belongs to everybody now that the town's bought it. And that really sets up the question: what does the town want to put at the center of their town? This is a 5-minute walk for a quart of milk. A lot of the hard parts of town planning is trying to figure out that. Like, is it walkable town? Yountville figured this out years ago, and with groups like you, have reinforced the idea that this town stay walkable. And the fun part is now, what do you put on the old school site? There's a lot of housing policies. The 253 very much updated housing element can be summarized because we did it. We had to do it. It's not. Our line is, you can have your own opinions, but you can't have your own facts. There's a lot of information that the town of Yountville has decided on around housing policies. The RENA numbers, which everybody is kind of getting comfortable with, and we'll talk a little bit about that tonight. We've had open houses where the town and the folks who are participating have been very clear what they like. They like outdoor rooms. They like classical architecture. They like gabled form. Mostly they like green spaces and significant trees. What they don't like is bare buildings and things that are kind of belong in cities. All three of those projects are lovely architectural projects. They just, for the response that we've gotten, don't belong here on this site. Again, it's just one input, but it was, let's just say it was not a 50-50 split. So we've done a lot of town scales, everything from the mobile home park to the south to Old Town. There's a range of densities. There's many amenities in town. After reviewing them and going through a lot of Samantha's really a lot of great materials at Parks and Rec, the issue isn't that Yountville needs more amenities. The issue is Yountville needs more full-time residents to enjoy the amenities that they have. That's a really great and amazing position for a town to be in when you consider just our town to the town to the south and Napa are looking for many more amenities for a town that doesn't actually have enough for their population. We're going to go back to this in a second, and we're going to talk about civic storefronts. In the way we're going to talk about it today is not necessarily like, hey, the coffee shop downstairs. When we think about mixed use, a lot of civic storefronts can have depths. These are from a book called Soft City. That will be the next book that we gift you guys. This is active ground floors, whether it's daycare or a dentist or a hair salon, are things that we've heard from a lot of our appointments that the residents are missing. They're missing the things that they now have to leave to St. Helena or Napa to go get, and that they used to be here. And I'm not talking about, a nice restaurant. So there is the school site, the aerial. There's some of the issues that, we're using time-tested town planning principles. We are not trying to reinvent things or like, hey, I wonder, what this needs. It is a restricted site. It's bound by a creek. It's bound by a private development in Hopper Creek. Both of those things are essentially inaccessible, so we have to build new infrastructure to get to it and get around it. And that also creates opportunities that we're going to talk about tonight. When we talk about open spaces or outdoor rooms, we're really talking about what are those edges that form and define those outdoor rooms, and how do they activate a space or not. This is how we left things with the town council last week. We're going to go through these 6 diagrams. The first 2 we're not going to spend a lot of time on. There's no existing school that's ready to rent this site. It needs to be reinvented. And of course, the single-family residence we're going to sort of about to dive into. But this is the last sort of series of notes that we spent with the town council. Tonight, we're going to talk about the neighborhood, understanding the site. We're going to talk about the possibilities through these range of diagrams. Again, they're conceptual diagrams, but we in our practice draw the diagrams in very rendered uses so that everyone understands it. You'll see pools and dog parks and baseball fields, and if we spend more than 3 or 4 minutes talking about a pool or a dog park, we would have missed the opportunity to talk to you guys, because really we're talking about big public making spaces. So far so good? Mm-hmm. And now we're underway. So one of the issues is the corner of Yount Street and Fennell Road. And one of the things that we want to hear from you is what your memories and what your sort of opinions are about those roads and how they're different, if they're different. There's a lot of abstract information that we're going to go through. Essentially, these are pictures of Fennell Road and Yount Street this morning, looking spectacular. The biggest experience in these public spaces is the trees. And that's not changing with any of the options that you're seeing today. So we're going to talk about a lot of things, and that's the reason we built this model. And then our daughter and her friends kind of built the trees. They look exactly how much we paid them to do. But mostly they help soften the model, and they help soften the town, because you can't really imagine Yountville without their trees. Okay, so have I gone too fast?
No.
I didn't think so. Brad's got a chip in my neck, so if I could slow down, if you see me jumping, that's what's happening. Okay, so there's the existing site, of course, today, the single-family zoning, which really is the recent post-World War II tradition of what's happened in Yountville, which is subdivisions slowly making their way into open, leftover spaces. And this, I'm just going to get on a mic, right? I have to talk and, hello? Yeah, this is good. Okay, so this isn't very complicated. Kara, can you just advance to the first one? This is this is the punching bag we all get to join in on, right? Nobody wants this. Of course, it's why you bought it. It doesn't have enough houses for the RENA minimum. It's way, way over dedicated to parking and cars. I think there's 250 parking spaces on this diagram for 42. There's five parking spaces for every house, 4 in each location, and then another guest on the streets. For the diagrams that we're going to go through tonight, these, of course, are kind of mass. These are single story. That probably would be would be 2-story, and our 2-story versions are going to come out on Thursday. Town Hall left kind of on its own down here, and maybe barely 10% of the space, because of the setback required by the creek, is saved for open space or walking trails. Nobody wants this, but there's a lot of ways to learn from what you don't want to define some of the things that are possible here. So far, so good? Any questions about this before I take it away?
I don't know that you could say nobody wants this. I think there's just a lot of possibilities for better, right? More housing and better options.
Carrie and I, with little kids, lived in a neighborhood just like this, and very happy memories.
Yeah.
Millions of people live in these neighborhoods, and they're very, very. Most of America lives in this kind of neighborhood.
Right. But we can do better.
But we can do better. We can do better on all categories. I would hate for anyone to think that somehow this isn't sort of there's a lot of neighborhoods in Yountville that look just like this, and they're very functional, and there's great neighbors, and they're very valuable, and they're not going to go anywhere but up in the whatever happens on the site. So thank you I think that's a good note.
Well, I would also add that I think this is infill. The town really can't expand outwards. So we have some housing and social dynamic opportunities to take advantage of. And so we'll call it the opportunity to design something like that still exists in other places. We just have to be more creative.
Second homeowners from outside the state might want that.
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
Yes, no, he's
Second
right.
homeowners from outside the state might want that.
What I just put down,
What you just took away.
I would sell all day long.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So I'm curious about RENA. Now, is RENA is, as I understand it, is a requirement that our community build a certain number of. RENA being, my understanding is that we have an obligation, a state mandated obligation to provide a certain number of homes that are workforce, moderate, whatever. This didn't have to be RENA. It doesn't have to be applied to RENA, correct?
Well,
I'm only saying that what the school wanted to do, and what a private purchaser of this plot would do, would be under no obligation other than perhaps a few homes to meet certain requirements, as did Fox and Glove.
Right. Yeah, and I think RENA is a term which stands for Regional Housing Needs Allocation. I explained this in greater depth at the Measure S committee, but it was part of the housing element law that was initially approved by the state of California in 1970. So I joked that's the year I was born. So that's when the housing crisis started. But it was intended to be a zoning, basically, I don't want to say incentive, requirement, so that municipalities throughout the state of California, throughout the state of California were required to zone for a certain number of housing units that were allocated to them by the regional planning organization, or what they call the MPO, which here is ABAG, so you're familiar with some of these terms. So this kind of trickles itself down. And so you had to make sure you could meet your RENA numbers through your housing element, which in some cases required you to go through a general plan update and upzone or rezone land. So that's how it originated. It sort of has made its way, and it's now in its 6th cycle, so it's now focused more on construction, and there's teeth, as they say, being put into the law. One of those things is the builder's remedy, where they can come in and take land use control from you, et cetera. So it's a very serious thing. And we were able to, I feel like I'm losing eye contact now. We were able to get our housing element certified this year, but it was based on mainly the Catholic Church property, being able to demonstrate that that could accommodate a number of housing units. If there is no progress, which we don't control, we're trying to, of course, get them to, do something there, then this site does become critical, because if we can't then meet our, RENA obligation, the state through HCD will come down and I guess sharpen their teeth. So although it's not like everything's got to go on this site, because it's really, they look at the whole town, like, we need to make sure that we're thinking about it through this site, because if we can't get the church or others to build workforce or affordable housing, then we will be in a tough spot.
Isn't it also true that given the fact that Measure S money was used to purchase a third of that do we really need to have a discussion whether we're going to build homes as were proposed by?
Yeah, I don't think
we're under an obligation to build.
Yeah. Yes, we are, because Measure S has to be used. I think he called it the punching bag. I think the reason that we've showed it is a lot of people have questioned the purchase price of the school, and that's what the appraisal was based on, because that's what the school was using as sort of highest and best use. So that's kind of the purpose of it. I don't think anyone, at least none of us, I mean, there are people that would like it. I would agree with the comment, but I think that's nothing we're considering here.
Okay. Thank you.
And I just wanted, before you started, as you're rebuilding, I felt like we jumped over this slide, and for purposes of the audience, because we provided a book to all of the members of the ZDRB and to the town council, which is called I don't know if you have the book here.
Right here, on Aaron's
someone
desk.
has it. Oh, here it is. It's called the Missile. You keep blocking me. Sorry for my stuff. It's taking.
Clicker.
I told him I wasn't going to talk tonight, so maybe he's getting mad at me. But this book is a great book, in my opinion. This is why we provided it. And what you see here is really a big part of this. And I think what's critical about this, and as I've shared with our ZDRB and our council, when we talk about housing, we need to be specific about, there's this big missing middle, which are these housing types, which take you all the way, from what is the single family. If you look at the image that's actually on the cover, it goes from single family homes to multifamily. So basically from high density to low density. And there's this broad middle that, this book does a good job of defining. So I think as we talk about the school over the next 4 months, we need to be specific about housing types, because then we can be specific about density, and then we can have a civil conversation about, what do we really want, versus it turning into, a war between 2 and 3 stories, or a density, just density discussions don't go well. I mean, one of my favorite quotes is, you ask someone what their 2 least favorite things, and they say density and sprawl. So it's like, pick your poison. Like, where are we going here with this? So I think we're talking about density, but I think we're talking about it in this frame right here. And so I think that's important for all of you. So as he starts to play with all the model pieces, I think some of these represent these housing types, correct? Correct. Yeah. All right. So I wanted to make that clear.
Michael, was your question answered?
Yes, it was, and actually part of it was just to make the point that having conversations about the original plan are a bit moot. As my opinion is that we should build more multi-million-dollar homes, and for any reason. I love the idea that there could be a potential to put in the mix some of this. For example, you mentioned, Brendan, that there's no step down for people who live here. So I don't know how you accommodate that. That's some of my interest. But I was mainly trying to understand and make the point that we really are, in my view, happily handcuffed to putting in a bunch of workforce and affordable housing.
And just to clarify, the town isn't required to build housing. They're required to zone for the building of housing. Yeah.
No, I certainly understand there's
Okay.
many steps before that happens.
Yeah.
Okay, so these alternatives really move the open space from the southwest corner, and we're going to go kind of in a clockwise direction. We can talk about sort of physical things, but because of the housing neighborhood sort of part of it, there is the organizing idea is really kind of where is the open space, whether it's a play field or a town green or just a garden or a series of gardens. This one blows everything off, and there are even a couple people that came today. There's great, not from a few but very determined visitors that we've heard. They think that there's already a plan that's sitting approved in some desk drawer somewhere, and we tell them, like, if that's the case, we have not seen it, because they're paying us to look at everything, all the alternatives. And we're starting here because this is blowing out essentially every existing asset, whether it's the farm stand or the ball field and the town hall building, which of course was the original school, is physically being moved here and rotated. It's a valuable and sentimental building, and I think it could help ground a two-sided town green. What you're seeing here in colors is everything in yellow is a walking path. There's more than a mile of walking paths versus the maybe 20% of a mile on the prior just sidewalk. And there's a lot of outdoor rooms, whether it's a town green here or this pocket park or these connections both to the creek and how to get there or how to get across the neighborhoods when the town, and it's a policy in the general plan, is to start stitching housing areas to each other without having to walk only on sidewalks next to cars. Again, a diagram, but we're trying to make it sensible so that you can see this is 130 housing units, 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms to studios. There's a range that you can get. There's 150 parking spaces in this diagram. And we've talked to a number of folks who I want to see the most amount of housing. Well, there's limits, obviously, what you can park. We're going to talk about that. These are all 2.5 story. These are fourplexes. It's the most dense of the housing type that's in the missing middle book. Because as soon as you start going taller, you get into very expensive construction. The fire department wants to see bigger roads around it. So for planning purposes right now, there's a great bias on our part to keep things to no more than 3 stories and wood frame, because you get into very expensive construction, which is a huge hurdle for any kind of affordable housing projects or for workforce or even market rate.
Would you, for the purpose of this conversation, just orient us? This is Fennell, and Yount is...
This room is oriented just like the town hall. The town hall sits
there,
right here like that today, and we're blowing everything out in this scheme so that the town, unlike Calistoga or St. Helena or Napa, this would be the only town really in Napa County that would have a town green or a town square idea. And there's existing beautiful maple trees that already sit here. It could be a play field. It could be a lot of things. But mostly the point of this diagram is that there's a civic sort of life here. We drew a big swimming pool, much to the chagrin of a few people we've seen. And a few people we've seen were like, yes, finally, you told me you were going to draw a swimming pool. I don't want to talk about swimming pools. It's here for scale, just like this play field would be. And the intent behind here is to make sure that every unit is on a quality outdoor space, keeping some of the successes of Arroyo Grande that open up onto the creek trail. All of these also open up onto the creek trail with more convenient parking in this case. We're definitely trying to not just stitch it to this neighborhood, but also make it feel so that you're not walking past just houses on the creek trail. And this, of course, is an interior room. This is a way to kind of cross and connect these things. So let's just talk about this after that brief description. Please, jump in.
The costs, all the costs associated with this project are the town's costs, right? So when you look at something very dramatic, such as moving town hall, That's a big expenditure that we don't have.
Yeah, and
to
I
do.
think, I mean, those of you that have been in town a while know that we actually floated bonds to do a structural or a seismic retrofit of this building. I know Brendan is doing his best to listen to everyone and having a blank canvas, so you're going to see all the plans. Mm-hmm. But I would tell you, unless we strike oil out in the back, like, to me, relocating town hall is likely infeasible. But I don't want to be that guy right now, but since you asked the question.
But that's the first thing that stands out. Although
Yeah,
it makes perfect logic to have all the civic buildings up on the edge by the street. I see all that.
Yeah.
But
yeah, and
also
this is
have to
a
look at
historic
feasibility
building.
at
Not
some
only did
point.
we do the seismic retrofit, but it's on the National Register as a historic building. So
Okay.
moving it is not an easy feat.
no. Okay.
There are 5 buildings on the National Register in Yountville, and that's not one of them. No. It's a very lovely building, and I don't want to tear it down, but it's been significantly altered, and it's not in the same category as French Laundry or the Grosinger Estate building, etc.
It's on some lists, so it's probably on the regional list.
It is on the Napa County resource inventory of historic resources for sure.
Okay.
And it's a lovely building. So anything else, please?
Just to clarify, parts of some of these plans do not require the town to finance the building of these plans, but rather to create the zoning and the regulations that would allow them to get built and potentially financed by outside development. Is that correct?
Yes, of course, yeah.
Yeah. So though this looks expensive to do, parts of it are segregated off to, we create the zoning, and then someone else takes up the mantle of building it, and that brings income.
There's a huge opportunity in the town to take control of this site, zone it, design it, and release it essentially shovel ready, which is a massive risk for anybody buying it without that level of community buy-in and the zoning and sort of all the EIR sort of things. So the town is essentially putting this into a fast-forward model for the town's priorities.
Yeah, and because we're taking control of it, it's not going to be mandated by the state because we're not meeting the RENA goals.
Correct. You're making it much easier and much faster to meet the RENA goals by going through this exercise, for sure.
Yeah, I'll also point out, it's important to note that the town has a 15% inclusionary housing policy, and what that means is if you're going to build this as a private developer, 15% of it has to be affordable by covenant. Mm-hmm. Okay, so just know that, and I think also, like, when you look at how do you finance things, obviously when things are affordable, they're being subsidized. Whether they're being subsidized by the market rate units or by grants or other things, there's a lot to that. So yeah, it's not just wave a wand and a developer comes in and does exactly what you want, right?
It would require a portion of funds to be dedicated to public art and all of that
Civic.
stuff. Yep.
All the stuff, yeah.
Well, the other logic of this plan, though, is that the civic part and also where the green space is, if it was decided that was needed, could be a phase 2.
Correct.
Because that's where everything is now, basically.
That is an excellent segue.
Yes, that was great.
Well, good.
Before we
Phasing
segue, I
is
think
You're welcome.
under any plan important to consider.
there are a couple questions from public. I think, did you have questions? So I just
Right,
want to not overlook that.
Yeah, Mike. As we go through these plans, we already saw with Fox and Glove or Oak and Vine, we saw what the market wants to build because that's where the big money is. So as we look at these different plans, let's take this one before we turn the page on it. Is there an entity that you are aware of that would be interested from a financial point of view in building this plan? Is this realistic, or is this one end of the spectrum that's nice to talk about, but there's no way in the world it's going to get built?
Yeah, I mean, when I look at this plan, I look at town hall being relocated, and I look at, yeah, I mean, and you will see that, I mean, similar plan to this with town hall where it is today, and to me, that's a much easier answer.
Well, let's go there then.
Yeah, so I mean, I think you'll see that. I think this to me, you know, I mean, if you want to look at just the housing, then yeah, there's a way for the housing to pencil out. I mean, this is where you have to get into the economics of the affordability levels, you know. So we can talk about that. But yeah, I think it's probably best to turn the page and show the next plan so that you can.
I think the running theme throughout, and I think it's a good point, is we'll call it the desire for the state to be increasingly heavy-handed in what is available for current and future residents of California and what the market determines, right? So this is an existential battle in a sense, and I think our opportunity here is to find that balance. We can't magically change the way the economy works or what people want to buy. It's the art of influence, and I do think that we're at very interesting times in terms of what the state is trying to do. I would call it a very orchestrated experiment at this point. So, but credit to Brad and the team to bring us together, and I think with combined minds, I think we just need to be realistic, and hopefully we sort of stack the deck in a way that creates the win-win, which is I think what we want. But all valid questions, and I don't think we have all the answers.
But that was a good question that Alan asked, that, you know, if you're looking at this kind of density and fourplexes, all fourplexes, is there going to be a developer that would be interested in building that? Or is the town going to be hiring somebody to build that?
It's a great question. I mean, I think it's going to come down to, again, the economics. And I think you I can't remember, I like how you phrased it. But I think that, you know, there's clearly building or builders risk, building risk, right? And I would never suggest that we're going to take construction risk. So if we were to partner with someone that, you know, is a contractor, you know, we're also not going to turn into a big housing authority and operate this. So we'll have to be very smart about those decisions, but don't think any of those people aren't walking away with many pounds of flesh, you know, and taking, you know, some of the affordability out of the project if we rely on them to finance it. So again, this will be a time discussion after we, you know, in essence have a entitled plan, which is a few years away, and then we'll have to make a decision as the town, you know, how do we want to finance it? If it's in smaller phases, it's much easier to finance, right? If it's one big project, then yeah, we'll have to have that conversation. Do we want to float bonds? Do we want to get into, you know, debt to do that? I'm not going to even start that conversation until we have a better feel for what we're doing. But I do think it's important to ask those questions right now. So I think those are all really valid questions. I think there's a lot of ways we could do it. I mean, fortunately, we're in a position where we didn't have to borrow to buy the site. We have a Measure S, which is a reliable and very significant funding source that we can use. So there's a lot of things in our favor. And I also point out as the transition, because now I'm looking at this, if you ask me the same question that I think, Alan, you just asked, I feel like this is much more feasible than what that was before. And I also think, you know, we're making not a significant, but an investment in, you know, those two buildings in the center, which will be the Wellness Center and you know, the Commons Hall. And I want to see, you know, how the community reacts to those. You know, like, if we fall in love with those, then we should really be thinking about how we phase around them. Mm-hmm. If we feel like we have to reconstruct them because they don't meet our needs or they're not to our standards, then that's a different conversation. So I think you see it here now as kind of a, you know, I guess phasing around them, and I will let Brendan talk about that so the group can talk about it. But I think that's another thing to think about.
But we don't have to factor in that part of it as we're planning.
Right. I mean, you have to factor in the fact that we own these buildings. Again, we're not making major investment, but these buildings have value.
Yes.
And if the community likes them, like, there's no reason to tear them down just to rebuild them in a different form, in my opinion, because that will get to the feasibility question that we're trying to driving at.
So these are going to be the existing buildings remaining?
Yeah, those two buildings that you see in the middle are the existing, like, they're literally, if you look at them, this 3D printer is pretty amazing. Okay. I mean,
Yeah.
It's like, those are the buildings.
And in their current locations.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is
They're not definitely staying, they're just potentially staying.
No, yeah. And again, think of it phasing, like how we do this. But yeah, that's what this season, and then you'll see them go away here in a minute.
This is there's a chicken and egg argument, right? Like, what's feasible? What do you want? Well, I can't tell you what's feasible unless you tell me what you want. So the job right now is for everyone to dream and dream big. And what you can have and the wants and needs conversation is definitely going to be part of this when we sort of get back to the town council about the sort of like the phasing and the flexibility, which we're going to talk about tonight. The part about this diagram is that there are parts about the public aspect, the open space things, that can also not really affect the housing, right? You can make some big decisions about housing and housing phasing, which is different from some of the town investments in some of the civic pieces. And as soon as you start adding some mixed use with boarding houses and short stay and other things that aren't typically sort of homes, and a lot of the dentist office and the proverbial hair salon and the things that are disappearing out of Yountville, in the ground floor of these things, and some of the green spaces behind them, so that Yount Street really kind of starts to achieve its destiny as a civic street, and has a story. And whatever happens in this building stays here. And one of the things that we keep hearing from a lot of residents is there's just no place to hang. There's no place to hang together. And that's not,
Say that?
well, there's
town?
lovely restaurants to go to, but that's different from, so every place, a memorable place, and it's a question to you, where do you gather that's not transactional, right? That's not a nice meal or a nice sort of hotel. Where do you?
In all the parks. Neighborhood parks, community parks, veteran park. There's tons of parks.
And then the question is, well, it's 9 o'clock on a February night and it's raining. Where do you go then?
Well, then you have to go inside.
Well, sorry. so that's the question. Where do you go inside? Where does the community go? And is it missing or is it important? So this scheme, obviously, we didn't have to literally move the houses. These are fourplexes. They can turn into townhomes. They can turn into bungalows. They're very diagrammatic. And mostly we tried to do it for a level of scale so that you can see a fourplex next to a fourplex. This is another fourplex for the Arroyo Grande project. They're similar. They're a little taller, little sort of, because it's not 2 and 3 bedrooms units, porches, and everybody has a quality outdoor space, which for all of the loveliness of Arroyo Grande outside of the creek is a piece that's missing. Are there questions about this? Can I move on? I call this the Town Green South Prime because there's just removing the cars from the front of this building does a lot of things in terms of the setting for the building. And
So is that intended to be a small park in front of?
yes, that's how we drew it, because I think that's one of the easy sort of choices, because of so many parking alternatives that the school district plan didn't allow, is that you can park all day long behind this building now that you own the property.
What is the bright green?
The bright green is more active spaces. Like, this could be playgrounds or dog parks or other things that wouldn't be sort of what I would call a passive kind of meadow or,
Okay.
green space. Play fields, pickleball courts. I don't know. Yeah, I know. That's right. I have to pay him $10 every time I say pickleball.
The only part I'm not crazy about is the idea of commercial buildings on that street, because Yount Street isn't commercial in that way.
Anyone else?
I mean, I'm not personally opposed to it. I mean, I think we need more commercials, so I see that as a potential asset.
Well, and you could argue that the facilities behind it are somewhat commercial as well, right? We're sort of activating the old school as a commercial property with the gym and whatnot.
My sense of it, our bias, is that for the last half century, this has been a very, very busy place. In the last recent memory, it's been very quiet because it's been an abandoned school. But there were dozens and dozens of people coming here to work and, of course, go to school, and buses and traffic and cars. And the pattern of this place is one of a lot of activity that's at the end of Weber and Humboldt, and this kind of triangle of activity that is not, more than a 2-minute walk from where a lot of retail comes together. We've had a few people come and say, "Hey, everything here should go down there." And then literally like a week later, we'd have somebody and say, "Everything that's down there should come up here." So there's a lot of ideas, and we don't really have a bias about that. But the live, work, and the shops, there's an image there on the lower corner of the image. That's actually right out of the Missing Middle book. All we're talking about is some shops for, a dentist or a hair salon, somebody who could have an apartment or a unit above, and some of that live, work activity, which is not necessarily retail. It's more just to engage the street. The church, the hotel, Bardesano. This is not out. This is smack in the middle of town. And I think there's definitely, when we talk to people, what's missing, it's not just housing. It's actually like things to go and make it a more interesting place to be.
Well, you haven't said it out loud, just to use a term, because I think the town actually codified the term resident serving retail. It was loosely defined, but it was in the general plan. The term that we introduced was civic storefront. I like that term better, but we could debate what those terms mean all day long. But I do think, and I've pointed this out in previous meetings, that when the town was saved by Don Schmidt and Larry Halpern in 1975, they consciously said Yonge Street is more civic and Washington is more commercial. And I think that's the principle we should build on. But again, I think Michael made the point, you could say the gym is commercial, or the wellness center or a gym. Yeah, it is, but it also was proven that the town couldn't support it. Gyms are also very commonly part of civic centers, so it's very much a civic use. So again, we could sit here and talk about hairdressers and blacksmiths and cobblers and all the kinds of things. But I think for me, the term civic storefront is more of what we're trying to achieve. But we're going to have to get into that discussion. I think the discussion for tonight is more of like the form-based discussion, right? Which is, okay, here's what these buildings could look like on Yonge Street or other places.
I will make a short comment before we move on. One of the things that I'm seeing, which I like, is just the elimination of parking lots in the front. I think that should almost be a town-wide. It probably is at this point. But just any building that has parking in front of it, we should eliminate. So these plans do that, so I want to apply that particular move.
Yeah.
Parking should be in the back.
Great. That's very helpful. We're also trying to eliminate curb cuts, which eliminate on-street parking and a lot of sort of the issues. This is an outward-facing project by the nature of its place and its history. Very different from a very busy commercial location like Bardesano, which is very inwardly facing, right? And you can be neighbors to each other and complement each other's sort of attitudes about this. This is called the Town Green North scheme, and it leaves Town Hall structurally untouched, but it puts an arcade now on 3 sides. There's a lot of sort of positives about this one, outside of the issue that the other 2 buildings are gone, but being replaced by a significant and new outdoor room. Is there a question?
No, he asked me a question.
Oh, sorry. So the lower right-hand image on the slide is actually a project that was built 20 years ago, right down the street from where my mom lived, up near Seattle. It's called Danielson Grove. It's done by Russ Chapin architects up in Langley, and they have a lovely collection of these pocket parks, and that's really what these 50-foot green spaces are about. So again, I didn't move any of the houses, and one of the biggest questions to you guys and to the public on Thursday and in December and in January and February is, Okay, we can talk about housing types all day long. We can talk about bungalows and fourplexes and townhouses, but really, what is the memorable outdoor gathering spaces that will define this neighborhood, this new neighborhood, as we stitch things in? So, Kara, can you go to some of the 3D renderings? We're just starting some of these 3D renderings, and you can start to see how this town green north can do. We've had a lot of Zoolander jokes tonight before the meeting. Keep going. So now you're starting to get some eye-level things with the arcades of some of these civic pieces and some of the town green things. And the upper left view is actually looking past up to Bardesano and to the other commercial pieces like the 3-story Stone Hotel. Starts with an M. I can't.
Maison Fleury.
Maison Fleury, of course. So this is again an open side to Yount Street, but to your point, it's not moving the buildings right to Yount Street. It's actually making a new space for some of that softer activity to happen. It could be a play field. It could be a place where lacrosse practice happens, and it could be a place where a summer festival happens. With the parking in the back. The parking and the unit count have not changed in the conversation so far. I'm going to keep moving.
The question that I asked Kim, I thought that this was an interesting notion to have a field that had commercial on the perimeter, and it relieves the street and the neighbors on that street from having commercial like right in front of their houses. And Kim made the point that we might not need more parks. And one of the things that makes me wonder is that if we have a list of so many park assets, green assets in town, and we do something like this because it's appropriate to this function, does that free up one of the other parks in town for something different?
For more housing. We have blinders on about this site, but it's an excellent question. It's the center of town. It can be multiple. You have a lot of parks on the edges of things right now. Green areas, whether it's I know a lot of the Vineyard Park and Yountville and Veterans all have beautiful green spaces and gathering things, and I think with another 200, 250 couples with significant others and things like that, this can start to be a very busy place. If the question is, are they really going to the edges of towns to recreate, or what kind of uses in terms of planning for the future are you making? Because right now there's a dominant industry in town, which is visitor serving, retail, wine, and food beverages. But the idea behind this building is that it can get reused for other things, and to truly make outdoor rooms and to treat those edges. I don't think it's important to find the hair salon operator today. The idea is that the ground floor, not unlike the Sonoma Square or other places, can have a long life. I got accused by someone on our team, like, look, it looks like the Presidio, and I said, that's a compliment. The Presidio is a very old and successful project, and it's going through its 12th version that started as barracks and is ending up as something different. So this is definitely the group that gets to think, for a relatively new town, a young town, what does it need? What is the decision that you want to be proud of in 100 years from now? And I think protecting some quality outdoor spaces is definitely an opportunity with this project.
Yeah, I personally like the idea of having it's giving me vibes of Savannah, which is probably my favorite small city in the world. And the fact it's in the center of town and I think is going to be used by more people. So I don't know if that's what you're envisioning as more of a kind of a Savannah type square, but
This is a copy of a project that I was a part of at Palmetto Bluff, which is an hour up from Savannah. There's a lot of similar
I thought that looked familiar.
weather, and it's copied from Beaufort and Bluffton and a lot of small towns like Yountville that had to have a space because not everyone had, cars. They had to sort of develop a small walkable space. Transportation is changing. I was in LA on Sunday night only by Waymo, and it wasn't my car. The car showed up and took me and my kids everywhere I needed to go, and then it was gone. It's not science fiction anymore. So the idea of creating memorable outdoor spaces and whatever the world will bring in terms of technology and uses, I think it has to be as old and as tested like Savannah, because Savannah's gone through, let's just say, a little more cycles than Yountville, and there are some things that we can learn from those established towns for sure. I'm glad that you recognize the similarity. The scale is exactly the same.
Yeah.
I just want to say two things to respond to Chair Miller's question a little more directly in terms of, are we going to look at all the other parks now that we have this? I think my answer is, they're focused here. Clearly, I don't want to get into a general plan type conversation. I did learn very quickly through the dog park debate that once we talked about Vineyard Park, people came out of the droves to say, what are you doing to our park? Don't change anything. So change is hard, as we know, in Yountville. And I would think if we're talking about other parks, we're going to see unintended consequences will come our way. But probably more importantly, if it's a master plan community or a master plan development, whatever, generally what we're looking at is just, we would require open space, right? So back to inclusionary housing, we're going to live by the rules the town sets for other people. So it's not like, oh, this goes away, we get to build more housing.
Right.
We're going to put open space. No, we would require, and it could be different, but I just don't want you to think we can trade with other parks, because I think that will mislead and derail the conversation.
I do have one comment on the park, which is, I think it sparks another kind of pulling on a philosophical thread, is this idea of, well, why is there a housing shortage? I mean, there's a lot of reasons for that, but one of them is that there's still demand, and then you can talk about that statewide, but then you talk about, well, why is there demand in Yountville? It's because we're in wine country, it has a lot of the properties people want. So we have to always make sure that we don't solve one problem and forget why the demand is there in the first place, right? And that's what, no offense to government and bureaucracy, but that's what they do. They say, hey, let's put a bunch of rules in place to solve one problem and forget that the problem was created by a much bigger opportunity in the first place. I'd quote this, my parents are from Eastern Europe. I've been to Slovakia. I've seen what government housing looks like, and nobody wants to live there. That was a giant social experiment that went horribly wrong, and everybody's trying to tear it down. Yeah, I'm not saying California's going to become that, but we have parts of the world of where they took it to an extreme. The reason I like the park, so to kind of wrap it back, is hypothetically it would be a nice place to picnic. I think if people come and they buy a bottle of wine, they want to sit outside in a more central location. So I think the idea that there is something that is good for both residents and tourists, I think we have to keep in mind, because that's just going to create a stronger reciprocal cycle.
We were drawing this as our team, and somebody said, well, what happens if you're successful?
Sorry, you got to go on the mic.
Sorry.
There are people at home watching.
So we were having these internal conversations for the last several weeks. I love it's finally great to talk to other people about these things. People who actually know Yountville. One of the signs of success after we're all gone is that the housing, the affordable, the families will come back if we do this right. And what are they going to want? They're going to want a school for their kids. They're going to want a play field. Now, schools are changing literally in front of our face with AI and a lot of technology. So, putting the 1980s version of the school back is not what I'm talking about. But the ability to have open fields and a series of buildings that could be anything from makerspaces to daycare to other things to respond to that need. Because if you plan for success, this is a very optimistic plan, right? So that there's a much wider age range to take advantage of these open spaces. And that's one of the reasons why we kind of kept drawing this until like we could convince ourselves. Okay, we're going to move on. Is that okay?
Are you laying out this one? Are you putting the models out on this one? Okay. Well, while you're doing that, the other thing I wanted to say, at least to you there, Mr. Zagorczyk, is I agree with what you said. I think if you started reading the book, one of the points the author makes in the missing middle is that now 30% of the population lives alone. And so you've had this big shift of people, and this, if you talk about the social experiment of the 3-bed, 2-bath house, and we have 30% of the people that are living there alone, it's sort of a sad sort of reality as well, right? So I think that's, at least when I read that book, he kind of keeps making that point, right? It's like, okay, we can all figure out how to live in smaller places, but for whatever reason, the market, is not driving that. I think it's driving Oak and Vine, to, I think, Alan's point earlier. So I think that's another, to me, like, wake-up call of, like, what are we talking about? But I think that what you're going to see here is, I wanted to point out, but now that the ball field has reemerged, the previous plans, eliminated the ball field. And you were obviously the chair of the PRAC meeting. I think I tried to make the strong point. If the town's going to consider that, we need to have that discussion early. We need to make that decision as a town early. And I know there will be people that will come out of the woodworks and say that is the worst thing in the world. And we just need our policymakers to make that decision if the other plans are what the town wants. Because I don't want to save that till the end, and then all of a sudden we do all this great work and design it, and then I've seen it before, and then it turns into the decision time for the policymakers, and they say, you know what, too many people showed up and said we're not getting rid of the field. And then guess what? Then we're starting over. And it's like, we are, I think, 6 months into this. We will be 2 years into this before we get to a place where we can, talk about the financing and the stuff that we were talking about earlier. So I just, I don't want to be hammering that too hard, but I do feel like that's a conversation this town needs to
Is
have.
the idea behind maintaining a ball field that if we are successful, that families come back and then there are children to use that field, or we just like the look of it?
I mean, someone referred, I saw this video of saying, don't be disturbed by the smoke of nostalgia. I think that, nostalgia is a real thing, and there's a lot of people that care about that field. There's a lot of people that, grew up on that field. And a lot of people still live in this town that maybe aren't in the room. Maybe some people did grow up. I know I saw Alan's kid playing up at Bournemouth Field, or at least at, and I'm sure he played a lot of games on that field. There's a lot of nostalgia that does affect policymakers' decisions. So I just want that to be clear as we consider these options. And if we decide, again, this isn't decision time, but if you all say, hey, you know what, that park in the front that we just saw, we really like that, well, then we really need to have the discussion about the field, because it doesn't fit in there. I know he's... Anyway, you go ahead, Brendan. You talk about this scheme. This is another one that I know we're showing everything, but...
Well, so conceptually, right, this is moving the open space away from the streets, both Fennell and this is obviously an existing open field right now, but we're putting civic things here on Yount, and we're putting housing on Fennell, and leaving this corner essentially, as a smaller park. Again, we can sort of take the parking away from it and kind of really represent this building, I think, the way it was originally kind of conceived. And again, the parking happens, and the play fields double as kind of an outdoor room, right? But again, it's a hidden asset. When you're driving around as a visitor, it's probably not going to be something that you run across, or sort of like, oh my gosh, that's a defining part of Yountville. For the folks who live across the creek, for the folks who live here, it's definitely connected to their everyday experience. You can get to it by the walking trail here. We sort of did a way to connect it here. it meets the RENA numbers. You can fit 72 houses or, units in this scheme. And the civic and the live work things are still here on Yount Street. The infrastructure is on the street. It's just that this is much reduced, and even though the green, we've sort of put diagrams on these things, we drew this out of just to make sure that we looked at moving some of these open spaces all over the site conceptually to be able to kind of test it.
Question, I'm not sure if you can answer this or not, Brad, but at the Veterans Home, I know there used to be a pool that the town was able to use. I don't think that's ever coming back from what I understand. But are the ball fields there still are they able to be used by the town?
Well, not by the town per se. I do think they're being used by...
Are the people who use the ball field here, are those the same kids using the ball field?
No, historically there's been a Yountville Little League, and I don't know for how long, but I know that last year, they were... they did organize a league. It was kind of like a last-minute thing. We actually bought the site in the middle of it, and we were unable to... we just kind of let it happen, but we never had an agreement for them to use it. We just... Again, they're in the middle of the season, so we would, we've had conversations, but I think it's, like the school, there isn't many kids. It's kind of like this question that's, on the fence, literally, of like, is there enough kids to support that? They do have little leagues. I think what I heard was St. Helena and actually Calistoga are consolidating into St. Helena, and then, Napa has a little league. So there are little leagues around us.
So there's alternatives not too far away if we didn't have the ball field here.
Yeah. The story from last year that I heard was that a certain number of kids from Napa Little League were turned away, so they were oversubscribed, and so that's what generally created our league. And it's sort of last minute. Like they said, hey, we need to accommodate these kids that got turned away.
What's going to happen in these community meetings is that when it gets to talking about baseball, we're going to remind people that this is a once-in-a-lifetime event, and you can definitely have an opinion that baseball or lacrosse or soccer or whatever those things are. For us, those are active play fields, and they probably belong somewhere on the site in some phased condition. But the biggest job right now for the visioning of this site isn't to figure out if we're going to annoy like the baseball league. It's really like, what is the right number of units? What is the right feeling of civic spaces? And how do you feel about the existing school buildings, whether it's built in the 1920s or in the 1970s? Those are really some of the attitudes that we're seeking desperately from you and from the community, so that we can report back to the town council, maybe not a perfect scientific survey, but a lot of the sentiment that goes into some of the policy making around existing things. And what is the town missing? I mean, it's missing a little league, literally. It's not missing a field right now, but everyone's grieving, just like the loss of the school, over the fact that we don't have little kids, to fill the little league. But what do you want? What is missing that you want? And you can say, well, I missed the Little League, but what else do you as a town miss? So this scheme obviously sort of puts it back in the corner. Do you guys what's your initial reaction, sort of seeing it in the back? Well, I call it the hidden park because it's kind of hidden.
My thought is to answer your question, what we are missing is people who live here. And so the idea of making affordable housing, to me, is more important than a field that never gets any use. What serves Yountville?
That's very helpful.
Serving Yountville is people that live here.
Do those new residents need playfields?
Most likely.
Okay.
I wouldn't think so.
Okay. Anybody else?
That's just my opinion.
No, that's what we're looking for.
I would agree with that.
I agree with it, and I think that they may need play fields, but they may not need a play field 50 yards away from their home.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah,
my experience the challenge is enormous, right? Because you have likely an entire town's worth of input. And typically what you do is you say, okay, I'm going to show you, if you want that, I'm going to show you what it looks like. Say yes, and then let people decide if it's a good idea versus shutting it out before they even get a chance to see it.
Right.
And so I think it's good to see it, but when you consider what the alternatives are, you're saying you're holding on to something that isn't really what it was, not solving for really what people really want, which is an active ballpark. It just seems like you're dealing with it. It's like buying gym equipment for your garage and hanging your clothes on it, right? Like it's sort of not fulfilling the purpose.
Okay, I'm going to keep moving to a couple more schemes, just in the interest of time. Is that okay?
Also, the hidden aspect I'm not crazy about. I mean, I think
Me
if
too.
you've got
Yeah.
green space, you need to really put it out there for people to see.
So Brad, how do we have that discussion about
I'm working on
deciding
it.
not to have a ball field?
I think
It
that
makes
with
more
Sam, with Samantha Holland, we are, trying to figure that out. And I do think, this isn't a decision for you. This is a decision for the town council. It's a policy decision that, how we use our assets, whether it's now or in the future. And I think we have to have the now discussion.
Going back to a comment you made earlier about the market shows that people want what oak and vine, big fancy houses. But if we built all these duplexes, fourplexes, townhouses, they would absolutely be filled with people. They would sell. It is not a question of, there's what the market wants, but the missing middle will totally be filled.
Yeah.
I was going to mention that too later, that the Oak and Vine project is what the developer thinks the market wants. And already when you look at it, they're taking 9 houses and they are packing them in. So they're already saying, well, I think the market wants single-family high-end homes. We're going to squeeze them into a space that 10 years ago would have been unimaginable. So the market's already showing, to at least the developers, that they need to maximize the use of space. And I think the jury's out on whether that is actually going to be desirable, right? And are they trying to squeeze it from both ends versus something like this?
Michael, you had a question?
Yeah, I've spoken before about the fact that I think
Is
the
that
town
on?
needs to do a better job at communicating, what our real goal is here. Now, I recognize that my goal may be different than many others. My goal is to try to create a usable space that is that we all would love to walk through and see. And I appreciate what's going on here. I hate to think that we are not giving an aspirational view to our community that says, okay, let's put aside this ballpark here. Let's focus on the fact that we bought a property that's going to solve some extraordinary problems that we have in our community. The businesses that are here are going to applaud this and support this kind of thing because it's going to give them an opportunity to hire the best people. They might be coming, they come to this community because they know that there's that positive thing of being able to live here. That's so important to what we're trying to do as a community. And I'm hoping that whatever Brad, you and your team come up with, that you figure out a way to really nail this. That let's not stay in the past. Let's not hope that someday somebody's going to be here to use a ballpark. Let's put something together that solves real problems that we have in our community and that we have throughout the state and our country.
Well said. Yeah, no. And I think just to amplify, and excuse me real quick, and to kind of, I keep talking, but you bring up good points. I just want to react where I think, to your point, the market is here. I think the other thing we've seen, which to me has been one of the, let's call it the successes of California housing policy, has been this ADU sort of revolution that's going on with, just seeing tiny homes and like how they work, and people are figuring it out, and I know that like you have one, and like people are, you're building things. And so I think people are envisioning smaller spaces in a much more creative, livable way. I guess that's where I see the ADU policy helping. I know that it creates other issues that we struggle with. But at the same time, yeah, I do think this lore of the 3-bedroom or 4-bedroom, big home is starting to get diminished. So, go ahead, Ashley.
I just want to chime in as a family that reared our children from birth, to launching here, to ask others to consider where play happens. So where play happens in this town is when they're young, it's at the Yountville Park. I mean, if it's the numbers would swamp anything happening almost any place else in town, including this field. And it's very family-based at first. It also takes place at Vineyard Park, sometimes behind the music, at Music in the Park, right? You'll see families that are picnicking in the back. But it, in my experience, is not happening on this school property. And then as kids matriculate and get a little older, even going to Willow School, which is an incredible school we have associated with our town as our resident elementary, then their affiliation is more with school peers, and things are a little more affiliated with Napa, and play spaces end up being in people's homes or in Napa. I think we should just ask ourselves to look currently at where play happens. And it's really hard to make a case that play happens very much on this space.
Good point. Alan, did you have?
Yeah.
You had your hand up too.
Yeah, yes, it's sort of a combination of what Michael said and the other Michael said, and what you were saying is, I do want to make the point that with Oak and Vine, that is what makes the most money for the developer. And what we have the opportunity to do here is provide a much-needed housing that will allow our businesses to succeed, which is how we as a town succeed. At some of the other meetings, some people associated with the Vets Home have been down here and have been talking with a certain amount of dread that they're not going to be able to staff the new hospital because they don't have any housing to be able to have those workers have any kind of life at all, or they'll be coming from 100 miles away every day. So anyway, we have an opportunity here that is a win for the business, and it's a win for the town.
I would comment on that quickly, that that opens that can of worms that is housing on the Veterans Home property, which is completely separate, but certainly we should keep that candle burning brightly.
Count for arena numbers.
Right, which is another can of worms next to the first can of worms. But yes, I completely agree. I'll say that my position is that the Veterans Home should partner more with the town of Yountville to solve Veterans Home challenges. I don't think it's fair for the town of Yountville to do that unless it's a two-way partnership. That's one person's opinion, but I'll state it fairly black and white, at least for the benefit of the group. But I hear you on the bigger point.
If it's okay, I'd like to kind of switch gears a little bit and talk about the businesses. As somebody who lives on Yount Street, right across the street, I'd just kind of like to get a little more clarification, probably from Brad, about what those civic businesses are, because my concern would be like the cost of land in Yountville is so high that small businesses aren't going to be able to afford to. We're not going to be able to have a dentist in there. We're not going to be able to have a hairdresser in there. And is there, affordable small business loans or something? Because I don't want to live across the street from a wine bar or anything that's on Washington Street.
I think as I tried to say earlier, we could debate that subject where resident serving retail was a long discussion, and I like the term civic storefronts because it means civic. It's not retail driven. There's always loans and things. I think ultimately what we're doing with Yountville Fit or the Wellness Center is the opportunity, which is to provide space to uses that we want. And so rather than a loan, it's basically subsidizing a use through low rent or providing space. And I do think I want to have a conversation at some point about, okay, let's talk about the uses, like specifically. But I do think there's a chicken and egg dilemma, from the design team's perspective, because you brought up a dentist. That's a great example. Now, a dentist's office is obviously a significant build out, right? Versus like a reading room Like, oh, we could create a reading room. Like that's, so when you get into the uses, you get into this question of, are we doing, are we designing for these uses, or are we kind of creating, more of like an arcade where small storefronts could go and then we make a decision down the road after it's built? Because it's hard to get someone to buy in because it's going to take 3 years to build, and unless there's a dentist who's saying, okay, I'm willing to invest now, then we could do what they call a build to suit, which just means, but I don't think that's what we want. I think we want to use the word civic, and what does civic mean? And I think if we use that word rather than retail, I think it gets us more where we should be on Yount Street, based on, again, what I think the plans have been historically in the town. It's nothing I'm inventing. I've been reading the general plans all the way back from the 66 general plan.
Is that in the zoning?
There is, well, first of all, the school is zoned public facility.
Right.
So the school has no zoning, you can think of it, because we're going to have, whatever we do, we're going to have to go through a rezone of that property. And so if we define civic storefronts along Yount as an example, we can then be very specific about what qualifies as a civic use.
It's also through conditional use.
Yeah, and then it can require a CUP or a conditional use permit. There's ways to do that, but I think we need to have that conversation at some point, because and that's also something that changes over time. It's like the world changes, and most cases retail adapts to the market. What I don't think we want is a market-driven approach on Yount. I think it needs to be civically driven.
I don't want to see food. I don't want to see 7-Elevens.
You're not going to have that.
No.
Yeah.
Am I on? Okay. I have another comment. Appreciate your comments over there. Thank you.
Guys know each other?
Yeah. I'm kind of sweet on her. Oh, this is public meeting. So I have a couple. When you place the civic commercial buildings across the street from our house. So my name is Cynthia Cap. For those, I don't know everybody here, and I'm Cynthia Caption. I live in this house. Kay and I live in this house, this one.
We're going to put it right there.
There you go.
There you go.
That's and Kay is my wife, and we've lived there for 25 years. So, it has been busier in the past. And I was talking to somebody this morning or this afternoon, and she was saying, well, what was it like? And, what was great about it was that there were kids across the street. So we heard in the parks and, the little playgrounds, like the laughter of children and moms here and dads here and that kind of, joyous stuff that I don't know if we're going to get that back, but that was really, wonderful to be across the street from that. And I grew up, and when I see the commercial buildings across the street from my house, I grew up on basically a street that was our home was on a street that was like Trancas or Jefferson, 2 lanes, zooming traffic, both sides. And so I'm thinking, in Napa, you have homes. There are homes that are now commercial that are across the street, especially Jefferson, right? Those, the dentist's office looks like a house. Planned Parenthood looks like a house. Well, it was a house at one point. And that was kind of like how I grew up, in a house like that on a 4-lane highway. And, you couldn't play outside because, it was scary. People would have accidents coming around the corner all the time. So when I look at the commercial buildings across the street from our homes, even if it's, pretty, it still reminds me of what's happening. And like the Queen of the Valley, where I worked for a long, not worked, but, used for a long time. Across the street from that, you have insurance buildings and, acupuncture and all these and chiropractors and these little homes that used to be homes. So I don't want our house to be one of those homes that used to be a home.
Mm-hmm. In the back, he has a question.
Hey, thanks a lot. Brendan, thank you for the diversity of ideas presented tonight. I think that shows a lot of hard work. Thank you. My name is Walker Bass. I live at Hopper Creek. I just have a couple of questions. Don't know the answer. who is taking the rental income? These are all going to be apartments, is my understanding. Is the city collecting the rent? Who establishes the rent? Who raises the rent? I like the idea that we don't spend a lot of money. We have a lot of expense line, like a pool, something like that would just be staff expenditure. Seems a little bit unnecessary to me, but I don't know who owns this land. Who is it? The developer? I don't know how that works, but it's something to be considered, I think, as we ponder all these diverse ideas that Brendan came up with.
Yeah, I mean, like I think we said early on in the conversation, it really depends. But through the planning phase, the intent is for the town to control it. And then once the entitlements are established, we'll have a conversation about the economics and the financing. So until that time, you can just basically think that the town is in charge.
Okay, so in the interest of time, moving things along, this is our second to the last scheme. And this is rolling, we call this flexibility commons. All existing assets outside of this 1960s building, which is whatever. It's this one, outside of this classroom building, the farm stand, the original school building, the town hall, all of the things are here. The ball field is here. The bright green here represents the dog park sort of scale. And this is arena-sized project, and of course it could grow in this way with the ball field acting as a phased improvement, and of course the existing buildings as a phased. But you're starting kind of in the back corner where from a lot of logic outside of Kay's very excellent points about some of the commercial pieces and the civic things. This is, the housing can be solved, while a lot of these other public pieces are. We've drawn versions, and we'll show a few on Thursday, that just puts a big garden in front of these and sort of has a garden setting. There's a lot of interim pieces, so that the priority, which is the housing, can activate the thing very quickly. And then with 150 people living here and dealing with the traffic and all the other pieces, you can kind of like, hey, you know what, no one's using this, or everyone's using this, and we need to get rid of this because now we need more housing, or whatever it is. So that's one of the reasons why we call this flexibility housing. This scheme has a bias for some civic uses out here, and we have other versions that bring this all the way to the street. So it's the opposite of the case that Kay just talked about. It's the houses that take over some limited civic pieces, but it can go back and forth. French Laundry, and there's a number of homes already in Old Town that are hotel rooms and other commercial serving pieces that are more appropriate to residential scale buildings, bungalows and things like that. So what do you think of flexibility commons? There's the farm stand, untouched.
I think I like the logic that we seem to be moving towards, of putting all the houses in the back where the ball field is and all that open space. And right now, and thinking of the front of the property as phase two. Because right now, as we're starting to use the hall and the wellness center as is, we don't know how popular that's going to be. And I think, like, the popularity of the gym will let us know if other small businesses will be feasible. I'm assuming the classrooms are not usable in any way, even for small businesses or anything. Okay. So that seems to make the most sense. And then not putting the civic storefronts out there yet, just slowly seeing if, because I've lived here a long time too, and people want a dentist, a hardware store, a hair salon, and then they don't necessarily use them. And so the feasibility of building all that up front just doesn't make sense to me.
Anyone else?
So it looks like the housing element of this is significantly reduced from what it is for the Town Green North plan, for example, or the Town Green South.
Yeah, this is essentially a first phase, exactly.
Yeah.
There are other versions that will show that have the same number or probably a little more when the ball field and some of these other sort of pieces are included. We will show a great range from 50 to essentially 130.
Okay.
Maybe more. The issue on the top numbers is the size of the units. We talked about the mismatch. The focus right now is small units, but they count. RENA doesn't care if it's a 4-bedroom house or a studio. So the bias for this project is to do things that match the need, which are smaller units. Developers don't like doing it because there's no comps that actually sort of match those kinds of investments. But for the people who live here, they're very valuable because they're less expensive to maintain, less property tax, all those other things.
Which type is this?
These
for
are
housing?
1-bedroom fourplexes that you're seeing, all
Okay.
650 square feet, which can be a 4-bedroom house in some other iteration, or it can be a little bungalow or have 5 or 6 studio apartments. So again, I'm going to keep moving along.
I'll make one comment.
Please.
I don't want to, well, two, I guess. I don't want to speak for Brad, but this does seem like the lowest cost option, at least from.
Yeah, I was going to flood. You can see the next slides.
Yeah. My second comment was the phased approach makes sense to me because I think it's we're trying to keep up with what the state is mandating to a degree. At the same time, obviously, creating a better environment for local people in Yountville. So I'm somewhat ambivalent about the baseball diamond, but the phased approach certainly seems prudent. It's a way to solve the problem and without over-indexing on something that we don't know is going to happen maybe in the next 10 cycles.
Our job, I very much appreciate this is definitely all about phasing, and it's the reason that we modeled the first phase because of its feasibility. The commons, the gardens, the open spaces are going in the other direction in this case, mostly because there is a bias for Stag's Leap and the creek and the eastern sort of sunlight in the morning. There's a lot to sort of be said for making things that connect to the creek and not sort of across the other way. So there's a lot of sort of conversations about that. And can you go to the next one, Kara? Or Brad? Thanks. So this is just as much as the first scheme that we showed that you were just sort of talking about, and it shows the phase, and you can go even further because of the division of parking, what I call kind of parking orchards and gardens, so that the parking is never this kind of large field. We've sort of saved the one around Town Hall mostly to make up for some of the minimal parking, and I think the design team has a strong bias to create the corner of whatever you do, to create a corner at Yount and Fennell as a really identifiable, open, beautiful sort of space, not the memory of dropping kids off easily and where the school wouldn't allow you to park in the back of Town Hall. Those are things you're not any longer burdened with. I have one more scheme, and then we're going to call it a night.
Yeah, the thing I wanted to say also, which, first of all, I want to compliment both of you, but I know Carrie's the mastermind behind the model, and I think the model, to me, speaks 1,000 words, right? And being able to see it, so this is the first time it's been out. I think this is something we can play with for the next 3 months. But when I saw this originally, my first reaction was like, we're not building all fourplexes. Like, everything looks too much the same.
Yeah.
And so you said, yeah, we did that on purpose because really we're just having to have a discussion again more on the concepts, which you'll see next, which is, and I know I gave you all the book. I said sort of read up on the building types, like kind of understand the building types. I think at the end of the day, we want diversity in building type. We don't want a uniform ... We want to see, and I'll let you talk about the shaken grid, but this is generally like how, we saw a lot of the stickers go on to what I called the European villages on the this, not that, which were more, we've all been hopefully to Europe. I think everyone in this room has, where you wander through neighborhoods, and it's really interesting when the buildings are not all rectilinear and matched up. So this idea of the shaken grid is basically, okay, how do you shake it up a little bit to create interesting public spaces and nooks between buildings? And that's why I think the final thing that you're going to model, which he calls the shaken grid commons. So although this is not like well thought out, this is where I was like, let's not just show the uniform building types. Let's start to get into a conversation, about mixing building types in a very sort of thoughtful way. So this is what we'll leave you with, but I wanted to just share my initial reaction to seeing all those fourplexes. I was like,
yeah, I think that was a question. Yeah, that was a question that was coming, because I think people will be put off by all those and by some of the renderings that were just like square buildings.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody is planning for that long term. That's just the effectiveness of this process. And I think we all want to see a little bit of meandering and a little bit of variety, and that's down the road in the planning phases.
yes. And that image in the bottom right is, I've never been there, but it's referred to as cat fiddle. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So at one point we were calling this the cat fiddle commons, but I think it's now the shaken grid commons. But the point I think I've heard Brendan make a number of times about cat fiddle is that also in South Carolina somewhere?
That's in Charleston.
It's in Charleston. So it was built in the last 10 years. So it looks like it was built 100 years ago. And it's a mix of 2, 3, 4 stories in some areas. It's all done in a very sort of thoughtful manner. But I think as you start to look at, and now you're starting to see some of the different building types kind of come on the map, that's, at least for me, where I want to see the community having a deeper discussion. Mm-hmm. And how do we sort of play around with the building types? So we have, back to your initial statement, we're going to create a place, not a project. And for it to be a place, it needs to have all these sort of interesting
yes.
And that
diversity.
That photo is actually my favorite photo that you put into your presentation, because not only does it look like it was built 100 years ago, each building looks like they were designed and built by different firms and built at different times. So I really love the diversity of that. And you said in one of the meetings that we have this very unique opportunity that most towns don't have, to build out the center of our town, and we have the opportunity to create the heart of Napa. And just one of my overriding comments to you is I hope that you're not hindered. As far as dreaming big and putting it out there, you shouldn't be hindered by existing buildings, by trying to tie into community center or town hall. We should let you do what you do best. And as I feel like you really understand what's important about creating architecture in Yountville and adhering to the foundation of, we're a town of, to borrow a line from Gary Jabara, hips and gables and historic architecture. So as long as you keep that as your foundation, just don't be hindered by other community and municipal buildings in the town, and just because I want this to be address issues and also be a place where people gather and be effective, but also I want it to be beautiful and something I want to take a photo of and put on Instagram. So
the challenge to us is, would you move here? Would you want to live here? It can't be, this is where,
Mike, I can hear him yell from the back room.
I've got them all. That was my sign. As soon as there's not a mic, it's time to close things down. The challenge for all of us, like all of us in this process, is, would you want to live here? And to your point, exactly, if I were king, I'd make every developer live whatever they're building for at least a year, and you would, the world would look different. But it would look a lot like Yountville, is my guess, because they're so very sort of carefully made changes. This scheme, we call it the shake and grid. There's a lot of things we can do for complete environments. Let's just call this phase one for purposes, right? So we don't have to get into the baseball conversation. We don't have to get into the existing pieces. But the town can very quickly build a compelling, unique precinct of Yountville. And you can talk about conditional uses and commercial things that are far away from neighbors that we can start to, the town can start to test each other about these pieces. And then as long as there is a roadmap, architecturally and kind of a phasing logic that the town council can see in February and March that says, hey, that's where we're going, but this is the next step, so that everybody feels that they're not being kind of sold a bill of goods by this sort of next phase, and then someone's all of a sudden going to take that away. So a lot of the conversations that we're going to have with the public is like, hey, this is a total plan, but this is what a first phase might look like. Because it's not just to address RENA, it's really to get the workforce here. And one of the biggest burning issues for the town isn't actually a RENA unit, it's actually a boarding house for 30 or 40 kids or older retired or some almost retired workers who want to not drive from Fairfield or American Canyon or Lake County and would happily give up their car if they could live a couple blocks from their job. That is a huge thing, and I think we can meet it relatively quickly, not wait for the 130 unit solution to roll along, or much less get approved.
I love the idea of people giving up their cars, but they may not use their car for commuting if they're living and working here. But I don't think Yountville is large enough to allow people to actually get rid of their cars. So.
If you understood that, I misspoke, because you have a very progressive town manager in terms of like reimagining what that mobility challenge is, but people have more ranges of options about cars. Some of them will have to be stored here, and we're not showing anything other than a 1.3 parking spot per unit right now. There's no project that I think responsibly we can show that says, oh, the parking's like not going to be required, or they're all going to park, in Napa or something like that.
All right, well, you called me progressive, so I have to respond. As you drove around in Waymos all weekend in L.A., and I think, yes, we will build, of course, parking, and whatever the ratio is, it's going to be 1+. But I also think, back to adapting, you talk about form-based buildings. I like to think there are such things as form-based parking lots, because I do know there are residents who have come to me, and if we do ride share, car share, we have, there's people in town want to give up at least their second car, and I think some could, I know I could do it, if my wife felt like there was a backup, and if there was a backup here where we had a parking lot that was used for more than just parking, I think there's an opportunity there. So I appreciate the shout out, but you have to be intentional from the front end. I've learned this lesson a few times, and this is where developers will kill you, by the way, because they'll all preach parking till the cows come home. But, build the parking lot, but think about how you use it, and I think it's a very important conversation. And I think whether it's integrating bikes, charging stations, again, car share, we're talking about, I'm trying to get to what's the next phase of the B-bus,
bike share.
Well, there's lots of
bike shares are great.
We're not inventing anything. I think, I know in Denmark now, they're doing 30% mode share on bikes. We're at 2% in California. It's sort of sad, right? So I do think these are conversations that are important, but I don't think it's progressive. I think it's happening. It's just for whatever reason in California, to me, this is where it drives me crazy, when Minneapolis and other areas out mobility us. I just think we're not trying. So I do think I want to be intentional, but I'm not going to be to the point where you can't have a car. But I do think, if you work in a restaurant in town, you could live without a car. And by the way, that'll save you $500 a month. And, there's a better quality of life out there if you can buy into that lifestyle. But it's hard, because this is, the California way. So anyway, that's my progressive speech.
So to wrap it up, can you
have one quick comment on one was I like the shake and grid concept and a little bit of sort of organic meets planned. And for what it's worth, when we did more of the row house style 4-unit, I didn't assume they'd all look the same, just for the record.
Correct. Thank you. Thank you.
You can make them very interesting and
Right.
feel diverse,
Of course.
even though it's on a grid. So just didn't want to lose that point. And conversely, the challenge with the shake and grid in this style is developers tend to do it more wrong than they do right. Economics come in, they have this great plan, and they look at the budget and they scale it down. And there's a sameness to the variety that is almost sort of disconcerting in the end.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right? It sort of like feels a little bit like, like walking through Paris and Vegas, right? Where they're like, look at this, facade of, or
It's
fake.
like
you're like, this is all
90 scale or something.
thing, yeah. So that's we just have to note that there's risk based on precedent in going this approach. But
One of the things that I like about the shaken, what are we calling it? Shaken,
The shaken,
not stirred.
shaken and not stirred.
shaken, not stirred.
No, one of the things I like the diversity of building typologies and residential typologies getting shaken as well, so that you don't have like, this is the dormitory style over here with no parking, and this is the 2-bedroom houses over here with 2.3 parking spaces per unit. I think it's good to get people more integrated and more mixed together in different types of building typologies.
I think these notes are really helpful, especially going out to the community. This is a perfect example of a really well done developer project where they designed one scheme and they just punched it out 5 or 6 times.
Yeah.
And if we end up having to do that, we will have failed, because we can design these pieces and the requirements into it, and it doesn't actually take a lot. These are actually all stacked factory OS modular things with a different skin on them. And there's projects, in Florida and South Carolina where you have to have a picket fence, but no picket fence can look like any of your neighbors. So when you're walking by, you're like, oh, this is a beautiful little town, and everybody has a picket fence, and then you look a little more carefully, like, they're all different, and it makes the place feel more sort of full of serendipitous decisions. We're going to see a lot more versions like this the further on we go. The diagrams are a way to get people to think about big ideas, and then we're going to start talking about interior outdoor rooms that really can be very effectual here without, to Kay's point, without really interfering or kind of making a negative impact at somebody else's expense. In this case, the across the street neighbors or the folks at Hopper Creek who, are definitely know that things are coming, but they'd love to see an orchard of parking between the two projects. That's a far easier thing than to jam a 3-story, building on the property line over there.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I think on the commercial end, one idea would be to, thank you, there's a lot of workforce housing, to maybe put in a daycare, so somebody will use it, but to use that for the workforce housing for the families, because if that's the case, where the whole thing been driving them to Napa or stealing it for a daycare center? That's something maybe as one business entity.
Yep. That's an excellent point.
Yeah, hi, my name's Shane. This is actually really more for Brad and maybe you guys up there. And I think you guys have done a great job of getting Brendan involved and getting people to come out and, look at this and have conversation with you. You called me directly, which was great. The one thing that I've picked up just in the last handful of years I think we had several surveys and the sticker thing, we put the sticky note on there. And you get maybe 75, 100 of the same people. And I know that when we go out and we talk to other people, we see and hear other things. And we don't hear ballpark, dog park, pool. We hear more of this and maybe less of that. And, the idea to get rid of that dog park, that's my own thing. Ballpark now, sooner, so that you can move on. I think it needs to happen. I just don't think there's more than 100 people that really are behind that. That's just my 2 cents.
Well, I think, I've heard, which I like the term, the smoke of nostalgia, because I do think it can cloud your judgment. But I think that's a policymaker decision. That's why you elect a council. They got to, I like to say we work hard so that their hard decisions are easier, but that's going to be a hard decision. Because they will be faced with people that have been in the town for a long time that are very nostalgic about that ball field. I've had to deal with this directly, some of these people. But I think but I think this is where it's important for you, Shane, and all of you to say, hey, this is what we think, And I think if the policymakers feel like the community's behind them, it makes the decision a lot easier. So, it's typical, and I mean, I've been doing this long enough, and Aaron knows, and people show up when they're upset about something, right? When they support something, they don't show up as much. And I think if you support that going away and being something else, you need to show up for whenever that meeting occurs. I don't have it scheduled, but I'm trying with Sam again to kind of, bring that to the forefront so that we have more freedom when we talk about what we're talking about here this evening.
It just looks like a crutch that's in the way of progress.
Well, I'm sentimental to Petco Park. I think we talked about. I'm a Padre fan, so they did a really nice job of having the buildings outline the outfield. So we, at least for purposes of maintaining the footprint, hey, they could be the fence too. But it was not a fully developed plan. It was just okay, this is how something shaken looks. But it's obvious that it maintains the the footprint of the baseball field. So that's just a conversation we're trying not to have with this group. I think again it has to be brought to the right level.
Well, to be fair, the baseball field is a part of the memory, and to be able to incorporate memories into the site, whether it's the school or the ball field or the wellness center turning into something else, something else into something else, is part of this process. So on a closing note, number one,
Ashley wanted to say something. So.
I just have one related comment, which is if you want to study something about having buildings at the outfield, please go to Sonoma High, where they have homes are the outfield, and those people petitioned to have a home run fence that can go down and up. And I can't remember the number, but I think it's $500,000 because they didn't want the fence there all the time. Okay, so watch
Sounds
that
like
move.
a Sonoma solution. Okay, so we're going to close with this. I want to invite everybody to sign up for the open house. There's a few slots left. There's a December, a January, and a February dinners and conversations. It's not like this. It's actually a bunch of conversations around a shared meal and a lot of these ideas. What does Yountville miss? What can we have? What's a good idea, in terms of priorities? It will be facilitated by somebody who's not so architecturally focused. The two women that are doing this are superstars and have been doing this for a long time. And the idea is to bring this back to you and the town council with a very clear story about what the community is reacting to in terms of open space, housing, numbers, parking issues, civic, baseball nets and outfield, whatever it turns into. Yes. Anything else?
For people here or watching, how will Thursday's meeting be different than this meeting?
This is going to be very similar.
Okay.
This group is at a higher level in terms of understanding a lot of the priorities and things, but it's going to be very quick. It's going to be a lot about the models. We're going to have them all built out. So we want initial reactions.
Okay.
And we're not going to turn around and say, hey, ZDRB said this, and we're not allowed to do this, and it's going to be an open field for conversations.
Listening. Okay. Thank you.
I know we're wrapping, but did you?
Sorry, go ahead.
Did you have I was
just going to say, on Thursday, would you recommend the people in this room come on Thursday, or have we participated?
No, I would say only two of you could go because there would be a Brown Act issue.
Oh, that's true.
So I would suggest the town council will not be there. I will not be there. This is just an opportunity for 35-ish people that are hopefully. I'd like to get new people there. I mean, I think someone made the point, sort of the same folks, and I appreciate you all coming because it shows your commitment to the community. But our effort, and you can see it based on the dots on the aerial right there, is to get some new people in the room. So if someone is opinionated about this, have them sign up so they can come and, and address Brendan and firsthand.
Well, in a way, it's almost the opposite. I think if you're not opinionated, it might be just because you're not faced with the decision point, but coming might draw out an opinion. It's the people who come with predisposed opinions that end up, the minority creates the majority outcome, right? So I think it's really about bringing the opinions out for that reason.
When the pictures of these models and the options get printed in the paper relatively soon, the appointment list is going to go from 75% full to, I can't get an appointment until January. This is crazy. And I need to get a hold of somebody. So it's why we have Saturdays, and it's why we have a lot of sort of built-in time for this. So things are about to heat up, as you can imagine.
Well, I do want to, on that note, I don't want to speak for the entire group here, but I compliment staff and the project team because some of us are part of the general planning process, and that really ignited a lot of, I would say, unproductive debate, because what would happen is say, well, we're going to maybe zone this up to 3 stories, and here's a rendering of what it could look like. And everybody lost it to saying, well, I don't want that. And it was like, no, it's just one example. It was tried to be illustrative and trying to add sort of depth to a policy decision, which tends not to go well. Whereas to have this type of discussion, whether it's 3 dimensions or not, of different options and linking it to a strategy, I think it just brings out a much more constructive debate. And I think even the most sort of hardened, opinionated person would be forced to consider that maybe their point of view needs to be broadened because there's so many angles on this. So I think this process is highlighting a successful path for that.
On that note,
We adjourn?
thank you very much. This has been very helpful. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Yes, so moved.
I second it.
All right. So moved.
All in favor? Aye. Aye.
Aye. Thank you.